And yeah, it's been a very interesting, time. I mean, the pandemic has been interesting for me. A lot of people come to me and they'll say, "Oh, so how are you doing the pandemic?" I said, "Well, I'm in my house all the time, and whenever I talk to anybody, it's electronically." And I said that it's the way it was before the pandemic. I mean, it's the same. And people don't. And I was in L.A. doing, work on that show Snowfall, which is over now. I mean, it'll be over this season, and I, I mean, I liked working on the show, but I hated being in a writer's room. And then all of a sudden, I didn't have to anymore. I could just sit in my house and turn on my computer. You know, I loved it. I loved it. It was great. And now, I guess the pandemic is kind of over, or at least it looks like it. And so I'm back in the world, but I'm not in a writer's room. So I'm very happy. And I've been writing books. I mean, I've been writing books a lot, and that's been a lot of fun because I like doing film. I do. I like it. It's fun, but it's not as satisfying to me as fiction. There's a deeper satisfaction. I don't even know why, because it's just as hard to write a screenplay, and you can do just as much with a screenplay. But for me, fiction is the thing. I just adore it, and even nonfiction, prose. I like writing. Percival Everett was getting an award in L.A. A couple of nights ago, and I had to introduce him, and it was so much fun to write my little page that I'm gonna say, because I'm always very committed. It's gonna be short, and there's no introduction that should be long. Even no matter how important that person is, you have to say the major things. And I think that's what I love about fiction. I don't know why I'm talking about this stuff. I'm just talking, but I have a book. It's a new. Joe King Oliver novel, and it's odd for me because I was talking to somebody about the book, and they said, "Oh, Walter, you haven't written about him in 5 years," and it's true. I didn't believe it, and I got the book out, and I said, "Oh God, 2018." It's funny, but I wrote this Joe King Oliver book, and I'm very happy with it because for I didn't really understand when I was writing the book what well, I knew what the plot was, and I knew what the mystery was, but I didn't know what the book is about, because books are always about something, you know, and it and I realized that it was figuring out how to replace hatred with love. How does that happen? How can it happen? What's the possibility of it? And and I was really happy. I said, "Wow, that's what my book's about." And so I just told you. Now I'm going to do a very short reading, two little minor sections. Anybody who knows Joe King Oliver knows that he was a cop, and he wasn't necessarily a good guy, but he was a very good cop, and he was a very honest cop. And um, and he was too honest. So the police actually turned against him. They almost killed him, but they didn't quite. They sent him to Rikers Island. They let him out of Rikers Island. They kind of destroyed his life. His wife left him. The only person he has really left in his life is this hitman who likes him for odd reasons, and his daughter who adores him, and who's there for him. And so that was the previous novel, and that was it had its meaning. And now it's a couple of years later. His 93-year-old grandmother and her ex sharecropper grandmother and her new three-quarters boyfriend, Roger Ferris, who's the richest man in the world, with billions and billions and hundreds of billions of dollars. He gets called to Roger Ferris's house because Ferris needs something for him. Now he's done some favors for him, so that's what it's about. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the favor, these short readings. The first one is, Considering the general lavishness of the manor, Roger's den was an anomaly, as it was small and unadorned. The walls, ceiling, and floor were all somewhere around 18 feet in width and length. The floor was sealed pine, and the desk pressboard, lined with lime-colored linoleum. Slatted folded chairs were the only seats, and there wasn't even a window. He went to stand behind the zombie desk. "You don't have a bookcase?" I asked, lowering onto my seat. "This is the room I do business in," he said. "No comfort, no distractions." Roger was 6 feet tall and weighed maybe 40 pounds more than my 98-pound grandmother. He sat exhibiting both gravity and elegance. Then he took out a pair of glasses with semi-transparent red frames and donned them. Staring at me through those lenses, he was reminiscent of a predatory bird thousands of years before humans dominated the Americas. Having been told that this utility closet of an office was only about business, I asked, "This got to do with your kids?" "Not at all." "Huh. There's a man named Alfred Xavier Quiller," Roger began. I'd heard the name. The natural-born genius Quiller was a poster boy for the Men of Action and other like-minded alt-right organizations. I knew the name, though at the moment I couldn't recall his shtick. "Mr. Quiller has been detained by an as-yet unidentified branch of the government. That or maybe an independent agency representing the government." An independent agency? How does that work? Roger sat back in his folding chair, evaluating the question. "There are times," he said, "when legitimate federal institutions are not allowed to take action. At these times, they often use independent agencies to obviate the law." "I see," said the blind man. "Quiller is being investigated for tax evasion," Roger continued, "of involvement in the murder of a U.S. citizen on foreign soil, and for the sale of sensitive information to the Russians." That's a full dance card. "I don't like him. He's a misogynist, a racist, a thief, and an elitist of the highest order. I'd be happy to see him shot by firing squad, hanged by the neck, or stoned in the town square. But the government may very well be railroading him, and the betrayal of our civil rights is a crime worse than any he's being held for. So," I reasoned, "the stoning has to wait for a constitutional review?" "Excuse me, Joe. This issue is important to me." His plaintive response was a surprise. Ferris was an easygoing boss man most of the time. That, and he usually laughed at my jokes. "Sorry," I said. King Silver squinted hard and then lowered his head. He had to reach up to keep the red glasses from sliding off his nose. After a few seconds, he looked up again. "Quiller got a note to me. He said that he was innocent of the crimes he was blamed for, that he was extradited from France only after being kidnapped from a dacha he owns in Little Peach. That's an excerpt of Minsk in Belarus. He says the government has been holding him without due process." "When did all this happen?" I asked. "I mean, usually something like this is 24-hour news." "I'm not sure. Maybe the government is afraid of what might come out. That'd be a good reason to hold him without judicial review. Fucking Patriot Act." "If he's being held unofficially, how did he manage to reach out to you?" "Bribed a guard, gave him a token I'd know was his, and a note explaining his situation." Roger looked into my eyes, nearly beseeching me, though I could not tell for what. "They have him in a private cell on Rikers Island," he added. "Rikers," I uttered, with hardly a tremor. The cold went through my shoulders all the way down to the fingertips. I'd spent time as a prisoner in Rikers. They gave me a private room, too. It was called solitary confinement, and it nearly broke me. "Yes," Roger concurred. "They're holding him there illegally while getting their ducks in a row." "What does that have to do with you?" The billionaire let out a sigh and then hesitated. "He knows that my weak spot is human rights." It didn't sound like much of a reason, but I kept that opinion to myself. I want you to go to Quiller, Roger went on. Question him and then look into his claims. Find out if he really was kidnapped. Identify the dead man. Decide if he was murdered. And if he was the killing justified? Guilt or innocence is why you have a trial, I countered. A trial would be meaningless in this case. I've reached out to the so-called authorities. They have turned a cold shoulder. I smiled, thinking about my own joints. Something funny? Roger wanted to know. Calm down, man. You asked me to come and I'm here. You wanted me to hear you out and I'm listening. Roger nodded and leaned back in his uncomfortable chair. I know, Joe. Thank you for coming. So, what if you believe that this man is not getting a fair shake? I could point out 10,000 young and old men and women around the country in the same situation. What's special about Quiller? Or, in other words, what does he have on you? My question had a definite impact on Roger's face. It was a look of haggard determination. I have committed no crime, he said. But are you innocent? I shouldn't have asked, but I couldn't help it. I've done my share of wrong in this life, he acknowledged. I've cheated and stolen. Some might even say I've been the cause of a few deaths. You're right, I owe a debt to Quiller, but not because of any culpability on my part. It was a delicately constructed claim. A slight breeze could have blown it over, but that was true of most of my clients. Is that all? I asked the brooding billionaire. Will you do it? I'll start and see where it goes. That's all I can ask. He said, and then he paused. Brunch is served soon. Let's go over the particulars and then get something to eat. So, he takes the job, talks to his grandmother. I like his grandmother. His grandmother lives in this, unbelievably big mansion on Manhattan overlooking the Hudson. And, they have all these people serving them food, but she always does her own dishes. She's really clear that she does her own work, And anyway, so his daughter is there. His grandmother is there. And he takes the job and they leave. And now he's back at work. His daughter works for him. And he's told her what he's doing. And so he's in his office and she's in the outer office. Or at least that's where we start. She was wearing a floral dress of blues and reds with a white background and a choke chain comprised of deep red beads, each carved into the form of a rose. The hem of the dress flared out at the knee. All that beauty, and yet she strode in like a prosecuting attorney, ready to seek the death penalty. She took a chair before the desk, and I gave a smile that had not the slightest hope. What's up? I asked. Quiller is a killer, she rhymed. Maybe he hasn't shot anybody, but his words are deadlier than a fully loaded assault rifle. Are we forgetting the freedom of speech? He's still a killer. So am I. That was the first time I made such a confession to my daughter. She knew, of course, that I had often went armed in the world. She even knew that I had been in gun battles where people had died, but I'd never been so blasé as to admit my culpability with a shrug. Asia Denise looked as if she wanted to spit on the ground at my feet. He's a murderer, she said. You have, I suppose, heard of the burden of proof. If she was going to prosecute, I was going to show that I could lawyer too. How can you sit there and defend him like that? He spews poison in his books and on TV appearances, and he shits on our rights. Asia knew how much I hated it when she cursed. I was old school. In my heart, I held women to what used to be called a higher standard. But the world had changed, and if I wanted a relationship with the new order, I had to at least be aware of his expectations. Sure, I said. All that's true, but Roger asked me to do a job, and I work for a living. But Quiller, she sputtered, and then was lost for a second or two. He's a racist. So am I, and just about every other dark-skinned person that lives in America. This whole country got the poison of racism in its marrow. You know that. But he hates black people, Daddy. He hates you and me and Mom, and everybody likes us. Like, if you help him, you'll be helping what he believes in. It was a day of many deep breaths. I gazed into the anger of my daughter's eyes, feeling pride for what she was saying. I was happy that she was still pure in mind, absolute in her expectations of what was right. Do you hate anybody, honey? I mean without good reason. A damn good reason. Asia was smarter than I and quicker, too. She saw where my argument would lead and so slowed her accusatorial roll. Mr. Ferris could hire somebody else to take this case, she said. Sure he could, but he asked me. You've turned down potential clients before. Roger's more than a client. Yeah, he's rich. No, it's not that. He makes your great-grandmother very happy, happier than she's been since your great-grandfather died. And one time, when he didn't have to, he helped a client of mine, a black man, escape the injustice of the criminal courts. She knew what I was talking about. But Quiller has said such terrible things, and he preaches that everyone who is not a white male is less than human. 40% less, I add. How can you laugh at this? I'm not laughing, Asia. I'm trying to prove to you that I know what I'm doing. And I'm not working for Quiller. I'd never take his money, but I owe Roger. I'm going to look into the case and I'm going to find out if the 40%er is being railroaded, and I'll turn that information over to the man who hired me. If I find out that Quiller is guilty, I'll just walk away. Ace's eyes gauged my worth. It looked as if she found me lacking. That's a moment that all fathers have to face. After her interminable silence, Asia said, I'm going back to my desk. She stood up and walked out. If someone had asked me at that moment to explain my emotional state, I would have said everything good and everything bad that makes me human. Thank you. Thoughts, notions, ideas, minor criticisms? Yes?
Did you always know you were going back to this character?
I wasn't sure of it. I knew I could have gone back, but, I wasn't, it could have just been that one book. But, I like him. I've never written about my characters. Many people who write in the genre write about ex-policemen. And, that's the last thing in the world I'm interested in. I just not at all. But somehow when it came to writing this book, he had to be an ex-policeman to have been in prison. And so I like it that I'm doing that. It's a different thing. It makes me feel like I'm more a part of the genre or something, Yes. Well, I wish I hadn't answered that question. I have none. I don't know why I wrote this book. I really don't. I knew I liked this character, and I felt that I could write this book. It was in my head, but like I said, I didn't know what I was writing about until well after it was done. So that's why I wrote it, but I didn't know that was why I wrote it.
Was it about empathy, among other things?
Well, this is a very empathetic character. Joe Oliver, he hasn't, he's had a hard life, but not hard like Easy Rawlins or Socrates, Fortlow or Fearless Jones. He hadn't lived that kind of life, He had a job. He was a policeman. He actually thought he could be a policeman, and that would make sense, that it wouldn't be a contradiction to his empathy. And, so I find him to be a very, he's a sensitive guy. He's not in control of his, passions, not as much as my other characters, but, he's trying. He really tries.
There's a great line. It says, I went into jail a guardian of the peace, and I came out lawless, or at least unbound. Really
Yeah.
Great way to describe it.
Well, thank you. Yes.
Follow up on your comment about not knowing, not really knowing until you were done. When you're writing your characters, do you know ahead of time where you want to take them, or do they take you where they want to go?
That sounds like a date, right? I know where I want to take this date, but then I go somewhere else, which, it's always a surprise. So I kind of look at writing like that,
Mm-hmm.
The idea I actually a guy gave me a ride today here, and he's from Baghdad, and he was trying to write something, and he was talking, and I could tell when he was talking that he he thought you could contain a novel in your head, and you can't. You can you know I mean, see pieces of it and parts of it and stories and arcs and stuff like that, but if it fits in your head, it's not a novel. And and he was shocked. He went, "You don't know before you write it?" Because people look at novels like they look at architecture, right? So, well, you're going to build a building, you got to know everything you're doing before you start building, and that's true. I mean, you can't, you don't want your building to fall over. Oh, the building fell down. What happened? But novels aren't like that.
So there isn't a particular moment where it took you in that other direction. It just at some point you realize, oh, we're down this road.
Well, yeah, after I'd written the book.
Right.
Yeah, and I'd finished it, and the mystery worked. Because a lot of people kind of think that, I think that when you approach, especially a genre like this, well, it's the plot. So the plot is somebody's killed,
Right.
and then we have to find out who killed them, which is absolutely true. Somebody's killed, and you have to find out, or some crime has been committed, and you have to find out, what happened, whether or not you can fix it. But that's the smallest part of a mystery. Yeah.
Thank you.
Or any other book. Yes, sir.
Which comes first, the story or the character of your, I think, 5 different people that you've written about? Is it that delineated, or do they kind of merge together where this story fits this particular character, or you think you want to write for this character and then create the story?
I could just say yes, and then it would be fun, because sometimes it's about the character, and for instance, Socrates, Fortlow. I think I was at Norton, and it was a long time ago, and before I wrote it, and I had written a mystery, and they sent me out on a tour. They said, "Walter, you're black and you're Jewish, and so we're going to send you to a tour of Southern Jewish book festivals." It was very funny, but it was great, because when you go to a Jewish book festival, everybody's bought the book and everybody's read it before they come. I mean, it's amazing, and so you have this thing that's going on, and but there's always, I went to a whole bunch of them, and always there 3 ladies, who were old then. I'm older now than they were then, but I was younger then. So there was these older ladies were sitting there, and they were looking, and they always asked the same question. They said, what we want to know is where your mother is in the fiction, because we see that, your father, because we black people, blah, blah. And I try to give some kind of answer, which actually would make sense of how my mother has influenced my life, etc. But they didn't accept it. And there's a moment in the book where Easy was reading Hadrian, and they said, well, when he was reading Hadrian, that's the Jewish part. And I'm going, Hadrian wasn't Jewish, but I understood there was a sense, these 3 ladies at a book festival, they thought of intellectual, and they're not going to think of black people as intellectuals, because whatever. And so I had to write a book about a guy who was a philosopher that these ladies wouldn't claim. And I wasn't having anything against these ladies, but I wanted to talk about somebody being intelligent and philosophical, which is a whole other thing, and first I thought maybe somebody he'd be in prison. No. First I thought he would be a minister, and then I thought he'd be at a university, and then I thought he'd be from Africa. And finally, I said, no, the American, University for Black People, prison. And so I sent, I sent him there, and so I named him Socrates, and because Socrates talks. I mean, he don't have to be educated. You don't have to be able to write. You just have to be able to talk and to continue to talk and to get other people to talk. And so that's where that came from. So was it the character first? Or was it the story first? It was, it was those three ladies.
I ask Walter every year, when's Socrates coming back? Did anybody see the wonderful HBO adaptation of Always Outnumbered, Always Outgunned? Were you happy with that? I thought that was fantastic.
Oh, it was wonderful. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was great. Lawrence Fish wants to do it again. I mean, maybe we will. I mean, we've been talking about it. It would be fun to do. It's
Walking the dog?
Huh? No, I don't think I might skip over Walking Dog. I'm not sure, though. I'm not sure. I have to go back. I might write a new book, though. I mean, it's fun to write those stories, It's like, when you have people facing impossible problems, which is what the original Socrates did. He faced impossible problems and didn't necessarily come up with answers. Anyway, any other thoughts, notions, ideas, questions? Yes. John Woman. Yeah, John Woman. It took me 20 years. Yeah.
The question was, what's the longest a story has germinated?
Yeah, 20 years. I wrote the first part almost like that. And then I kept on trying to figure out how to write the rest of it. And I would start and it wouldn't make any sense. And I would start and it wouldn't make any sense. And finally I realized, almost stupidly one day I said, oh, right, I need to outline the second half of the novel. Because usually you start from the beginning, and I had just written the beginning. So I thought the rest of it should be like that. But then one day I realized, I have to outline it. John Woman, it's a novel of mine about a deconstructionist historian. And I really like that because I think all historians are deconstructionists because there's no truth to history. There's some truth to history, which is what makes it dangerous. But there's no real, in the end, you don't know. Well, you could take two people, one person who's, far left and the other one's far right. And you say, okay, I want you guys to write biographies of Ronald Reagan. They will probably say the same facts, but in a way that won't be anything alike, and this is history. Anybody studying the history of Ronald Reagan is going to have to read both books, and then they're going to pretend that they can be objective, but they can't either, 20 years.
Maybe we could talk a little bit more about Quiller. What a fascinating character, and I don't want to give too much away. That's the trouble, is spoiling, but this is very early on in the book. I mean, this guy is fascinating. He's the alt-right, leader. But he also graduated from, I got my little notes here. He graduated from MIT when he was 16 or 17. He's an inventor, a poet, and a painter. I think he's 48 years old, an animal rights supporter, prolific writer, etc. Very complicated person.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting, one of the problems, this may not be the answer you're looking for. One of the problems I see in America is that there are all these. It used to be that America, the racism in America was everywhere. It's most places still, but capitalism has shrugged off racism. They said, we're going to oppress everybody equally. It's not, if you're white, you're going to get your Social Security that we give you. If you're black, you're going to get it. We don't care. If the black you do better, I don't care. And then, of course, I don't believe in the existence of white people. But when you go beyond it, there are people who think they're white. And the notion that you have somebody thinking that they're white, and all of a sudden they're doing as bad as black people are. And they're saying, well, you begin to think, well, the black people must be doing better, which is a little bit true, and so then this conflict occurs, right? That's the thing, and anger and hatred. And the other thing about Quiller is he doesn't know who his father is. His mother is terrible. He's been on his own his entire life. He's angry. He's really, really angry. And there are all these people in America who are angry. But
his wife is one of the best characters in the book. His wife was one of the best characters in the book.
Oh yeah, the wife is great, man. And I think that what you do is you find out that he changes. And that change, the transition of who he is, which has nothing to do with his survival, is the most important part of the novel, and I need to talk about it because I keep on thinking. You see these people, like if, on YouTube, you see these people. They're two old people. They're like in their 80s. They retired when they were 62. They now have no money. They used to have money. The guy worked in a bank, and the woman had, like a little business, but now she can't walk, and all he can do is greet people at Walmart, and they can't live on that, and it's like this. And of course, you understand why people like that would like Donald Trump, because Donald Trump's saying, I know that you've been cheated, and they have been cheated. But the truth is, we've all been cheated. And if we could get together, it would be fantastic. We would say, well, okay, you got this problem with money. I got this problem with money. We got a problem with money. Let's do something about that, and not worry about, which president or which Congress, because Congress is going to do what you want them to do. President's going to do what you want them to do. I don't know about the Supreme Court, but, I don't know, that's something else.
And there's also this great second plot in the book regarding, Oliver's ex-wife's husband is in jail, and he's working with the Russian mob buying heating oil and selling it as diesel fuel.
The scam, you buy heating fuel for $2, and then you sell diesel fuel for $6. It's like it's a big, because some people go out and they rob liquor stores. And you think about the Russians, they rob the government, and they make billions of dollars on it. And and he, this guy was working with them. His ex-wife's husband. He hates his ex-wife. He hates her husband, but he loves his daughter, and he can't let the wife get destroyed, and so he has to help this guy out of his problem. It's really, but that's just, it's almost like a funny side thing in the thing. Yes. I did. Yeah. No, I knew all the things that were happening. It's, this is happening, and this is happening, and this is happening, and and there's a lot more. I mean, there's a lot that goes on in this book, and I think some people get a little lost in it. But I just love writing. I just love writing. You just, you're just sitting there writing, and all these, there are all these ideas and possibilities, and they're not working. So you have to work them out. So you feel really bad, but then you worked it out and you feel really good. I love, one thing is I usually read a book out loud when I get to the 10th or 11th or 12th draft, and just so I can hear it. And I record it. It's really, it's great. Because novels can be very complex, but they're also very simple in the end. They kind of have to be, and even though I love poets to death, sometimes poets forget that, and they go, and it gets so far out there. I say, well, wait a second, I don't get this, and it used to be that people would try to fix it but now they blame you for not understanding. So what do you mean you don't read Middle Hebrew? Well, how else can you understand my poem? I'm like, man, I can't go out and learn Hebrew to read your poem, Anyway.
And there's another great character, Aaliyah. Is that how you pronounce it? Aaliyah Ruiz. Can you talk about her at all?
Well, no. Yes, that's the bodyguard, right? You're talking about the bodyguard. Okay, just make sure that. Yeah, well, no, I love the Continental Op. And she's patterned on Dashiell Hammett's Continental Op.
We just last night had our hard-boiled discussion group, and we talked about the very strange and interesting Dane Curse.
Oh,
got into that. What a wild book.
Well, Dane Curse is wild. Also, Red Harvest.
Yeah,
I love Red Harvest. I mean, if you haven't read Red Harvest, one of the great things, one of the chapters is called the 17th Murder, and almost all the murders are caused by the detective. Which is like wild. He's just killed. He doesn't necessarily kill people. He kills some people, but then he causes other people to get killed. And for some reason, but that's Dashiell Hammett. He's very cynical and very wonderful. Dashiell Hammett knew these, he was communist, and he went to communist meetings and stuff, um, and they came up to him and they said, "You have to name the names of these people," and they gave the people, said, "You have to say that you know these people and that you were at communist things with them." He says, "You already know that. You're telling me." He says, "Yes, but you have to say it," and he didn't, and they sent him to prison. But that's what Hamill. He was like. He was more heroic than his detectives. He was a great guy. He was like, "I am not going to, I'm not going to give up my what's right, just because you're going to send me to prison,
And we never learned the Continental Op's name.
Yeah, well, it's the Continental Law.
The Continental Op. That's his.
Yeah.
That's his formal name.
But it's her name. You see, it's Aaliyah. She's the Continental Law, the international.
Right.
Yeah. Is that it? I know, because I can talk forever. So, but that's everything. That's all. Oh, Every Man a King? Well, Huey Long came up with it. That was his when he was running for governor of Louisiana. That was his thing. And there's a song. Randy Newman has it in the Good Old Boys album, Every Man a King.
Such a great album.
Oh no, I knew it from the beginning. Well, because listen, his name is King. He's named after Joe King Oliver, who taught Louis Armstrong how to play cornet. And he's got King in the middle, and it's so cool. The whole black thing, that you name your son King because you don't want anybody to disrespect him by using his first name. Say, if you're gonna call me, King, then that's fine. You can call me King. If my name was Joe, that's not so good, Say, hey Joe. So, well, no, I'm Mr. Oliver,
There's some questions from our online audience. Don't want
Yes.
to neglect them. Let's see. I just lost it. Edward would like to know what happened to the Easy Rollins TV show.
Well, I just a guy I'm writing with Jerome Hairston, and I have just turned in a pilot to Apple. We'll see if they want to do it.
Right on.
That was an easy answer.
That was very easy. Tell us a little bit about working with John Singleton, what that was like.
Well, John Singleton, I just love saying it, was a great man. He really was. And it's funny because, as in fiction, great people always have lots of flaws. John had lots of flaws. But, he was born in the hood. He lived in the hood. He had his office in the hood. He made movies about the hood. That was his life. And, he did other things, of course, but that was a big part of his life. And he like, for instance, there was a woman who was worked in the crew for, shooting the thing. She's probably still there. And so, but John, because he's living in the hood, he's walking around somewhere, and he runs into this woman. She knows him. Hey, John, how you doing? He goes, hi. And he says, what's going on? I said, well, I just got out of prison. It's really hard getting a job when you get out of prison. Nobody wants to hire you. And John said, well, you could come work on the set for Snowfall. He said, if you can keep the job, you can have it. And there are like 100 people like that, 1,000 people like that. With me, John called me and he said, 7 years ago, he said, Walter, I want you to go into the Snowfall writer's room with me. And he told me all about the story. And I went, John, it sounds like a great story. I said, but I don't write television, man. I don't know how to do it. And he said, that's okay, brother. All you have to do is come in and back me up. And I was like, wow, okay, John. And that's what I did for the first 2 years. And then I started writing, But yeah. So anyway, that's something about John.
Did Gary write for that show too?
Gary Phillips?
Yeah.
Yeah, the last 3 years. Yeah.
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 Another great writer.
Yeah.
Good friend.
And
of ours.
Tiger Williams also. I don't know if you know him. He wrote Minister's Society.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Questions about the editing process, just so.
Yeah. It's like this. You do an outline, sooner or later it comes to a rough draft, and you go through the rough draft and you make changes, and then you read. So that's the second draft. Now you read through the second draft, and you see things that are wrong, and then you go fix them. And then that's the third draft. So you read to the third draft and you see things that are wrong, and then you go fix them. And then you do the read there. And it goes fourth draft, fifth draft, sixth draft, seventh draft, eighth draft, 23rd draft. Finally, you get somewhere, you get like the 23rd draft. And you see things that are wrong, and you don't know how to fix them. So the book's finished. You know? And, and I think that's the way it's going. And I think it's the best way to look at it because, this whole notion of perfection, there are no perfect novels. There are no perfect people. People in novels, are close. You understand them in the same kind of way. And you love them for the same reasons, But is there something else that you wanted to know that? Okay. All right. Yes? Well, now here's the thing. If you came back to that book 3 years later, you would be able to fix the things that couldn't be fixed. And then other things would come up. But, right now you have a scene where these two characters are talking, and there's, I was watching a movie from a friend of mine the other night with, it's called The Front. Oh, and there's a scene with Woody Allen and Zero Mostel, two of the most unlikely people you could ever see on screen together. And it's the best acting job Woody Allen ever did. And it's a beautiful scene because Zero Mostel never says why he's there. And Woody Allen has is responding to something completely that he's making up in his head. And if you wrote something like that, every time you look at it, you say, oh, wait a second, maybe he should have said this, or maybe he shouldn't have said that, or, oh my God, well, this is, because, I set up this scene, but I've broken it down a little bit because he says this, I must say, Walter died not that long ago, a year ago. He was 102. I asked him when he was in his mid-90s, I was interviewing him, and I asked him how he ever wrote that scene. And he looked at me and he says, Walter, I don't have the slightest idea, and I think it's that, you know what I mean? It's, who you are at that time, what it is, how you're seeing it. And you have all these emotions about it, which might be right. They might be wrong,
Let's see. Stacy would like to know, do you know what the future will hold for Asia? Do you have a plan?
Asia, his daughter, Joe's daughter. Well, I really like her. I'm not like one of those people who take my care. I know people say you're supposed to kill your darlings, but she's going to remain my darling. I'm not going to kill her. But I don't know what she's going to make of her life. She wants to be a detective, and I don't know if she will be. I know she's thinking about it. I know she's really, really smart, and she's really committed. But I know that being a detective would break her in certain ways because she'd have to be more like her father.
How about a question about I know you read widely and broadly, and can you talk about what your childhood, the portrait of the artist as a young man, what was in your library? What were some of the formative books for you?
Well, I've always been really kind of drawn to science fiction, because I just, there's when you read Jules Verne, which I think probably was one of my first kind of serious reading of science fiction, you realize Jules Verne invented the upcoming century. His writing, he just invented. So, well, there's going to be submarines, and there's going to be, when he figured out that you could shoot a rocket to the moon, that's a much more efficient way to do it, to shoot a rocket to the moon, which is in this book. But, it's just like he was so brilliant. So science fiction is part of the creation of a new world, or an old world, or another world, or a different way to look at life. You can do all of those things. So I've always really liked that, and I've always really liked mystery. I mean, listen, when I wrote Devil in a Blue Dress, I had no idea it was going to be a mystery until I got halfway through it, and I said, wow, this. But I had read, Ross MacDonald and Chandler and Hammett and all those other people. I mean, and it was just so, you know, there's something about that sense of noir, that sense of humanity, that
Yeah.
that even Sherlock Holmes knows.
And Los Angeles, as we all know, is such a bizarre and surreal landscape, you know. And what's interesting was we had one of our talks during during the pandemic, and Walter was talking about how, there was nobody on the roads. And what was LA like during that time?
Yeah, there was nobody on the roads. Um,
The air was clearing up, right?
one of the wonderful things about America, no matter what happens, everybody wants to fight. I just love it. I'm going to fight you if you make me wear a mask. I'm gonna fight you if you don't wear a mask. I'm gonna, I'm not going to take that vaccine. It's a plot. It's Bill Gates. I mean, you're like, wow, man. I mean, it's kind of wonderful, but it was subdued because there were no cars on the road. And, L.A. is the city of cars. I mean, I think there's like 1.5 cars for every person in L.A.
Very quiet
Yes.
group tonight. Christina.
Oh, when you're on tour, you don't have time for that. I got here I got here this morning. I'm leaving tomorrow. It's like, yeah, I'm gonna go. Yeah, but I love the desert anyway. Yes. Huh. It's such a good question. I'm not sure I've read any new books. I've been doing a lot of rereading. I reread The General in His Labyrinth, by Marquez, which is just so wonderful. I reread The Lord of the Rings, which I was just like, because there's something about the writing of of both those books. The style of writing is so powerful that, you really, because if you do a novel or a comic book right, you can't make a movie out of it. If you, the best parts of it will be inside people's heads, and it'll be my empathy with your feeling, whether it be really good feeling or really bad feeling, and I thought Tolkien was just great at that, and Marquez is just he's beyond. He's I'll be talking to somebody. I had a talk with a person recently, not that long ago, a week ago maybe, and they were talking about when they write books, it's really really clear. This street is like that street is like that. The reason they write these books is it is that way, as if you could know what a place is like, as if you could. I mean, there might be 4 or 5 people who know what Phoenix is like. You know what I mean? Most people, they got their little Phoenix, and there's this expectation of false reality that really bothers me. And I was saying, I said, listen. I mean, I wrote a story once, an Easy Rollins story, and a mouse was living in this house, and I did a reading, and a guy came up to me and say, "Hey man, in that book that house that mouse was living in, that big blue house?" And I went, "Uh-huh." He said, "I live across the street from that house." Now, in reality, he does, because he believes it. I made up that house, I mean, I guess there's some chance that it could exist, but I don't think so. And what I love the most, and what I look for right now, what I'm looking for right now in books I read and reread and that stuff, is I'm looking to understand how I can break free of the confines of false reality.
Do you read Percival Everett by any chance?
Yes.
Love his stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's really good. What's the new one called?
It's called Dr. No.
Dr. No, right? It's so wild. It's a book about nothing. It's like Seinfeld, but for real. It's so wild. It's like is a book about nothing, and some guy wants him to break into Fort Knox, which Goldfinger did, not Dr. No, and because there's a bag in there, and what's in the bag is nothing. Not nothing is in the bag, but what's in the bag is nothing. And so nothing is a thing. It's just wonderful. I feel that when you read that kind of fiction, it frees you. It frees you to be able to think in ways that are beyond. I got to go to the store and buy a bag of rice. You know what I mean? It's not that. Well, what kind of rice? Man, it doesn't matter. But he's a wonderful writer, and he's really brilliant.
Well, this is a good segue. Who are some of your favorite writers?
Well, Marquez is certainly, one of my favorite writers. I'm always a little like and I like almost everything he's written. But like for instance, my favorite poetry is the Four Quartets by T.S. Eliot. I have no or good feelings about T.S. Eliot, but the Four Quartets is just amazing. It's astonishing. You could just keep reading it like on a just on a circle. It would be, it's so brilliant. I love some of the books of Roger Zelazny, the science fiction writer. I just think again his use of language is kind of beyond me, you know. But I mean, I like books.
Hammett?
Huh? Oh, well, sure, yeah. There's Hammett and Chandler to a lesser degree. Ross McDonald maybe even to a greater degree. Ross McDonald, I mean, he wrote the same story over and over and over and over again. But it's so great. And his explanations, like Chandler's way over the top with, his similes and stuff. But like, but Ross McDonald, he's like he's like a surgeon with it. When he explains something to you, it's like, oh my God, It's kind of like, almost like music.
Philip K. Dick?
Philip K. Dick had great ideas. He had great ideas. And, the first third of every one of his novels was fine because, he wasn't jonesing yet. But by the time he needed drugs and he needed to finish that novel so he could get paid so he could get drugs, the novel doesn't work anymore. Was that one where the guy just, at the very end, he just flies into outer space. His body, he just takes off in outer space. And you're going, come on, man. You just wrote that so you could get your fix. And I know it.
My wife thinks he's a better short story writer than a novelist.
Oh, yeah.
That's interesting.
Well, and I actually love the short stories of Stephen King, too. Stephen King, I think, is wonderful.
Sorry to hog all the questions. Anybody else?
They want to go, man.
Yeah. Well, this guy, Robert, is a kindred spirit, and I'll give it right to you afterwards. No, go ahead.
Do you read any nonfiction?
Oh, I love nonfiction. I love great nonfiction. I've read like the complete works of Freud, for instance. It's just because, but it's a way of thinking. Kind of selectively I read Einstein because he's so hard to understand. But but anybody who can write creatively about what they do or something that happened, to allow you in to understand it, I think it is fantastic. And I love, like I say, I love writing introductions for people. I did an introduction for Alice Walker, once. Who she doesn't know who I am, but they asked me to come in there and do it. And
I doubt that.
Huh?
I doubt that.
I don't know. You doubt it, but it was so wonderful because at the end she went, thank you. That was good because she didn't expect me to like her. I don't know why. I do, but yes. Well, the answer, of course, is the simple, adage: writing is rewriting. Right? You write it all down, and it doesn't work. So then you kind of go, well, where are these things? And after a while, the places where the schisms are, it gets, they're simpler and simpler. Like, well, he was here, he can't be there. Or if they're feeling this, why did that happen? There's all the, those you start to ask those questions, much, broader than you could ever think when you're just writing it down. Yeah.
All right. There's a Robert, who's a man after my own heart. He says, "Have you ever read anything by Paco Ignacio Taibo?
Oh yeah, Paco Taibo, I love him, man.
Wonderful writer."
He's wonderful. You know, he's one of the communist writers. You know, we used to go to. We don't do it anymore, but we used to go to Europe and to
Up
the
north.
international crime writers. And he was always there.
Gijon, is that the one that up in the Basque country?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And that was he's a wonderful writer, and it's very it's very passionate about life in general, but also about writing
And about
so,
Coca-Cola and cigarettes, I
Yeah,
remember, is his
yeah.
big thing. But he writes a series, or wrote a series set in Mexico City. And he had this one-eyed, I can't remember the guy's name, Hector Belascoran Shane. He was part Basque, part Irish. And, one of the books is called No Happy Ending, But another, great kind of unsung writer in this country. He's known all over the...
Yeah, but he's an internationally known
Yeah.
writer. America's it's hard with America because it's hard because it's hard because you'll find a lot of writers in other countries have a point of view. Now, and I'm not talking about the point of view of their characters. So Paco Taibo, I mean, he's like he knows what's wrong with the world, and he's gonna show you. And every once in a while he's going to fix it, and that's it. It's great, and there are not so many of us here. I think the younger generation of mystery writers is, starting to, do. Steph Cha, I think, is doing, really interesting stuff. And
Yeah. Ivy Pacoda, interesting.
who?
Ivy Pacoda, do you know her stuff?
know.
Writing about LA. Yeah.
Wow.
Let's see here.
Yeah. Wow. What is that book that he wrote about being in prison?
Cast the First Stone.
Is that Cast the
Or,
First?
or Yesterday Will Make You Cry. They reissued it. Norton did.
I think maybe it's Yesterday Will Make You Cry.
Maybe.
It's crime because everything is crime in America, but also it's just his experience, in prison, which is just amazing. And he's so brave. He tells you everything that happens in the 40s, right? You could say it now, but like in the 40s, you're talking about it. And really, I think Chester Himes is a better writer than Ralph Ellison. No question, actually. Word for word, I think he's a better writer than Ralph Ellison. And I know why everybody loves Ellison. But when you're black and everybody loves somebody, you really begin to question it. Because you say, all right, yeah, right. No. I think, listen, Chester Himes is he's just a great writer, but also is Langston Hughes. I mean, there's a lot of black writing which is kind of lost in the world.
Some of that kind of counterculture stuff from the 60s, like Clarence Cooper and Robert Dean Farr. Do you know any of those
Robert Dean Farr.
guys? Yeah. Yeah, really
I
interesting.
don't know the
Or
Cooper.
John Williams. John.
Yeah, John Williams.
A.
John
Williams.
Williams is very challenging. I find the work very. I mean, I love the work, but I find it very challenging.
All right. Anybody else? Maybe we'll wrap it up and have you sign
Oh
some
yeah,
books.
no, right there.
Still got some more.
So, going over a couple of writers, I just wanted you to say your thoughts on Elmore Leonard. And also, it was interesting when you said that a lot of the genre are ex-policemen for whatever reason. And it just made me think of some of the books that are about policemen. Joe Nesbo,
Mm-hmm.
James Ellroy writes a lot about policemen. I just wondered if you could talk about a little about Elmore Leonard, and then also what makes it interesting to be a policeman as opposed to an ex-policeman.
I'm going to talk about writers. I mean, what I find really interesting is there's two reasons that people are interested in a writer writing about policemen. The first is that writer was a policeman. And I forgot there was a writer I knew. I forget his name, but he was, he's dead now. But I once went out to dinner with him and Ed McBain. And Ed was never a cop, doesn't know anything about being a cop really, but he studied it so hard. He knew all the little nuances, like, with everything. And the guy who was a captain in the police force didn't know any of that stuff. And it was so funny just to listen to them talk, because, Ed is like, oh, it's this and it's that and it's this. And he go, oh, really? Oh, I didn't know that.
That
Oh,
wasn't Ed D, was it?
huh?
Was it Ed D?
No,
Ed D-E-E?
no,
Yeah.
no.
Or Bishop?
Though it's almost close to that. And listen, Elmore was the greatest guy. I listen, and because he had that thing like Parker. He understood the internal humor of language. And he can make anything funny. I mean, and you're just reading it and loving it. And he did that great movie, Valdez is Coming. I mean, my God, And I remember when he got the National Book Award, Lifetime Achievement thing, I bought my $1,000 ticket and went because just so I could go up to the table, and say, listen, Elmore, man, I just wanted to congratulate you. He died soon after that, but it was so funny because he went, I said, how you doing? He goes, well, I finally got rid of that wife. Oh my God. She's terrible, so like, I'm on the market again, and it was he was just, that was him. He was like, he wasn't going to slow down, until he stopped. And it was he was so great. And I love reading them, and I love them when they become movies. And and he was just such a sweet guy. He was completely, it wasn't like he was humble. He was just like, hey, here we are, man. Look, how you doing? It's great. I would walk into rooms and he'd be sitting in a chair somewhere, waiting to meet with the reporter or whatever. He was just so wonderful. And he was not. I mean, he was very ambitious, but he wasn't competitive, you know? And it's really hard to be ambitious and not competitive, because, hey, I think they got more money than I did. I was having a talk with somebody today about it, and they got more money than I did. I was like, so what? You know? I mean, if you want money, you go into real estate. You don't write books, I mean, and if somebody gets a lot of money, number one, they often lie about it. Number two, it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter, but it's hard not to feel that, or, you get this review or that review or, whatever. It's true, but I was born and raised in LA, I mean, and the desert is right there. I used to go to Joshua Tree, and, but I think that he excited my love of the desert. That's for sure. Yeah.
Can you comment on just been talking to one authors on Octavia Butler?
And like, so, I mean, Octavia was a friend of mine, as much as people are friends with Octavia Butler, she was something. Yeah, no, Octavia, Octavia, I mean, her life was difficult, but it wasn't difficult like, concentration camps and bombed out cities. And, it wasn't that kind of tough. It was just taking care of her mother, writing, and get, because, she worked for years and years and years and years to get where she was. When her mother died, she moved up, up north. I think it was Seattle. Yeah, she was in Seattle. And she, bought a house, and she was living next door to these two people who were scientists. Makes sense in Seattle. And they asked her one day, what did she do? And she said, I write novels. And so she gave them one of her novels. And, some weeks later, a month later, she saw him. She said, oh, did you ever have chance to look at my book? And they said to her, we saw that it was science fiction, so we gave it to our children. And I think that was one of the big, like I remember one day we had a conversation about how do you, because I don't let the genre define me. So like I'm writing all this stuff all over the place. And and she did say she thought it was a mistake that she hadn't done that because people weren't recognizing her, and of course now they do. But it was after she died, you know. It was so sad, you know. At the same time, one day I was at a thing, and everybody, a science fiction thing, and everybody was talking about Octavia, which of course she deserves it. However, one of the people on the panel was Samuel Delany. He's the greatest science fiction writer that America ever produced, period. And the audience were like, "So, Mr. Delany, did you ever talk to Octavia?" And I'm like, and I finally just said something. I said, "Listen, you people, she's gone. He's here. Pay
Dahlgren.
attention to him."
Dahlgren.
Dahlgren, my God. Was that Babel 17? Babel 17.
Yeah.
You read his work. I mean, it would take a year to read any novel of his. You know, I mean, but I think Octavia wouldn't have trouble with me saying this. It's not like I'm saying she's less. I'm saying that there are people who are coming up, and what you do is you say, well, it's going to be that. It's going to be Ralph Ellison. And you say, well, yeah, okay, Ralph was great, but there's still Chester Himes, and there's still Richard Wright, and there's still, Langston Hughes, and there's still Zora Neale Hurston, and yeah,
You just mentioned the fact that you didn't stick within one genre.
yeah.
Was that difficult? Did you have any battles with that, or was it just?
I have no internal battles with going from genre to genre. I have many publishing battles. And, luckily I've been at it for so long, I know a lot of publishers, actually literal publishers. And so I can get them to, publish books. It's just I have to not ask for too much money, which is fine with me. I'm not, if I write a book, I want to get it published. And if it does well, it does well. If it doesn't, okay. But no, I don't have any inside, I know. Like I wrote a book called Blue Light. It was my first science fiction novel. And it was a book about the soul because, I'm not a spiritual person. And the only way that I can say I'm spiritual at all is because I believe that I have a soul. I can't not believe it. And so I wanted to write a book about that. You could write a mystery about it, but that would be really, it wouldn't be good, You could write a war movie about it, I guess, it wouldn't be good. So I had to write, it had to be science fiction or alternate fiction or whatever they call it. Yeah. But, I write what I write.
Anybody have a last question? Or can I
Question.
Can I get, or maybe second to last? I'm going to, Stefania, our friend from Italy, always tunes in and she always has good questions. And here's one for you. What are your aspirations as a writer? Have you fulfilled your personal purposes, or are you still looking for something more?
I want to bring that around to sexuality, but I don't exactly know how to do it. Yeah. Somebody asks you, say, well, have you had the perfect orgasm? You say, I don't know yet, No, but do I have aspirations? I'm happy. I'm very happy being a writer. I'm very happy being a writer. That's a fact. But could I do more? Can I be somewhere else? Yeah, I think so. And I keep trying.
Well, thanks so much, Walter,
Thank
as
you.
always, and thank you all for coming out. And thanks everybody for watching online. Okay, so everybody who bought a book should have a number. And if you wouldn't mind just picking up the chair and putting it against the closest surface, or else we can do it.
I'm going to sign here.
Yeah.
Man, this is fine. Yeah.